the Open Fire podcast with me, your awesome host, Tom Gilbert, and that guy.
It's nice to be here. Thank
Dave
you for inviting me
Calvert.
onto the sofa.
Fire expert and superstar.
Artist,
Shop
podcaster,
owner.
author, shop owner.
We'll need to talk more about your side hustle stuff, because I think it's amazing that you are a novelist
I am.
and you own an art shop.
I don't own an art shop. That would be
Collaborative.
I'm a part of a cooperative who manage an art shop. Yeah,
Exactly. And I didn't even know you were an artist, let alone part of a cooperative.
in Chelmsford, in Essex.
We'll put a link to your shop.
Artists in the Meadows. It's on Instagram.
Is it?
Yeah,
We aren't on Instagram, and I don't know why. We'll talk to
Maddie
about
talk
that.
to our producer.
So today's episode is going to focus on the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report, Dave. The inquiry published its final report on the 4th of September, and the government have said that they're going to carefully consider all the recommendations to ensure that the tragedy can never occur again. Those named in the Phase 2 Grenfell Tower Inquiry report include the likes of LABC, Kingspan, Celotex, Ryden, all the names that we've been hearing about through the duration.
And it's fair to say them and a number of other people and organisations were vilified in that report.
Absolutely, and you don't need to look much further than testing. I mean, even the testing houses have had a pasting as well, haven't they? So I think what we're trying to do with this episode really is to start thinking and giving people access to the Phase 2 recommendations.
I can't help noticing you've got a copy of one volume of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry next to you. Do you want to show it to the camera just to prove that is this to prove that you've read it?
It does, and there's actually tabs in it. I say tabs.
One tab in
There's
there.
one tab in there, but it has been highlighted to remind me. So yes, I went and purchased all 7 volumes of that, and that is the last volume, which is the one that includes the recommendations.
Okay.
But I think what's really important is, bearing in mind how big that volume is, there is one whole volume that is just dedicated to the people that died in that fire. One whole volume, just talking about those people. So it just gives an indication of the scale of it, right? And I don't think I was really truly aware of what that scale felt like until I held a whole volume that was dedicated to that. So that focuses the mind a little bit. Now, there are 58 suggestions for recommendations 58 recommendations as suggestions for change. There are several which will have a direct impact on the sector, and I think if implemented, they will have a massive impact. There are also recommendations you would expect to come, and I think that's probably the first one we talk about, which is the lack of recommendations to social housing specifically. But what the report talks about is that there was a piece of legislation, the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023, that was released, and that is that's the piece of law that allows the social housing regulator to make recommendations. So whilst there aren't any actual recommendations for social housing within the Grenfell Tower Inquiry, it makes suggestions that the social housing regulator.
So what you're answering there, Tom, is that there's been criticism levelled that the report didn't include that area, and that's you're just explaining.
Yeah, absolutely. There are suggestions, but not recommendations in there.
Sure.
But it makes the connection.
So yeah, you're right. 58 recommendations made, are generally sort of widely available. We thought we'd go through a whistle-stop tour of the ones that we thought were most prominent.
Yes.
Just talk through them briefly. Open for discussion, and we're open for comments if anybody wants to write in, or comment on our LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Or on our YouTube. I believe you can comment on YouTube.
You can comment on YouTube, and we would like you to, and subscribe on
I'll take your word for that.
Yeah.
As you know, I don't use you. I can barely look at myself in the mirror, let alone watch myself on camera.
This is true.
So, anyway, just and in no particular order, really. So we've got a list of recommendations. I don't know if we're quite looking at the same list, but a review of the definition of high-risk buildings. Now, this is interesting. We did touch on this in another episode. So, at the moment, the BSA, Building Safety Act, focuses on all buildings, but a lot of the requirements are only in relation to buildings over 18 metres,
What they consider to be high-risk buildings, right?
which is where the definition high-risk buildings comes from. Now, the reason we mentioned this before was you have long been an advocate, and I give you credit for this. Way back, just after Grenfell happened, you were asked to do an interview on the BBC, and you were, to some extent, a lone voice saying the risk in buildings actually lies in the demographic type.
Yes, absolutely.
Rather than the height of the building.
Completely.
Do you want to put that in your own words? I haven't explained it very eloquently there, but my point being that, you were asked this question many years ago, and you've stuck to that ever since, and now the industry seems to be coming back around, and that is that recommendation.
Yeah, and I think the inquiry recommendation talks about how that scope should be extended, not in the way you would have imagined it to be extended to include more buildings, but it sort of considers that high risk 18 metre plus definition as arbitrary, and says that really it should consider the nature of its use and the demographic of the occupant. And the reality is that buildings are generally not the reason that that there is a danger, right? Normally the danger is presented by the occupant. Grenfell Tower is ever so slightly different for very, very obvious reasons, because the building did present a significant hazard.
So Grenfell was an outlier in that respect?
So we,
in terms of the...
No, so we acknowledge that the whole built environment has got issues, and we acknowledge that the situation that Grenfell Tower found itself in from a construction perspective exists in a number of buildings all over the UK, and actually you could go further afield. But the point is, when you look at fire statistics, the reality is that those that die in fires, apart from these disasters, those that die in fires broadly are the elderly. And actually, elderly people generally live in bungalows, which is why you see a low incidence of fire in bungalows, but disproportionately high number of fatalities in bungalows, because generally the people in there are non-ambulant and can't get out.
And this is borne out in the black and white statistics published by the government.
Yes.
Every year, well, usually a couple of years delayed, but that fatalities in fires occur primarily, the higher quantities are in bungalows.
Yes.
That's where you're coming from.
Yes, and predominantly in the room of origin as well. So generally you've got elderly people dying in the rooms that they're in at the time the fire occurs. So the point is, and around this recommendation that comes out of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report, is that the definition of high-risk buildings needs to be extended to consider the use of the building and also the occupancy demographic of the building.
So with that, is our view that high-risk buildings is likely to extend certainly below 18 metres, but it's possibly going to be based on a separate definition which is more aligned to the occupancy of the building rather than the scale of the building.
So my gut feeling is you'll see buildings over 18 metres, sheltered housing accommodation, and supported housing accommodation. For example, that's how they'll broaden it up, where they really start focusing on the occupancy.
And on that, so that then gives you some insight into where the landscape's going in the future, in terms of building safety cases and all of the additional requirements that go with it, that are currently focused very much on 18 plus buildings. Mm-hmm. It's going to come down to all sorts of other buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. And those buildings predominantly based on the people that live in them rather than the buildings themselves.
And the authorities that are responsible for them probably need to start thinking about that.
Absolutely. As I said on the BBC when a council decided to put sprinklers on all its high-rise buildings, and I said, well, what about your sheltered accommodation buildings where all your fatalities happen?
So that recommendation ties interesting. Now, this is a controversial one. A reconsideration of the appropriateness of stay put.
Yes.
And now the reason I say it's controversial is, personally, I feel people who are on either side of that can't really or don't want to hear what the other side has to say.
I agree with you.
There's one side that is very much from what I would sort of describe as the fire engineers or the building designers side of it, which is in favour of stay put.
Yeah.
And the other point of view is, for want of a better word, from the social sciences side. From
of course.
Sort of the human element, if you like. Can you maybe, as devil's advocate, give us the view from both sides?
I think I can.
With that?
Yeah, I think I can. Well, so I've been a long advocate of the stay put strategy, as I would guess you are as well, right? not necessarily where
I
we
am,
sit
but
now.
I have some caveats, to be honest.
Absolutely. Well, the caveat's obviously that the building's built properly, right? That would be one of the big caveats for me. But I think having sat on panels with people who've been in the industry for 40 years, who have been around the block a bit around this, my schooling was very much in the stay put strategy world. And the argument for stay put is that in a 1 hour compartment, the fire should start in that compartment, it should stay in that compartment, and the only people that would need to evacuate the building are those that are affected by that apartment, with the caveat that if you become affected by heat or smoke, you should then start to make your way out of the building. Now, that as a rule, and obviously you'd be evacuated by your own fire alarm within your own building. Every high-rise building in the UK won't have a fire alarm system to evacuate everybody. It'll all be a Part 6 system, which means it's in individual flats. So the argument for that is that if you've got people in the building who are immobile, who have disabilities, who have vulnerabilities of any sort, broadly they are safe to remain in their flats, unless of course it's their flat that is affected. So the whole point of the PEEP was almost a non-point up until the point that Grenfell Tower happened, because before that point in time there wasn't this multi-fatality situation where the fire started in a compartment, unzipped the entire fire precautions of a building and put everybody at risk within between 17 and 35 minutes after the fire started. So the whole point of stay put strategy fell apart on that day because, and this was Professor Jose Terrero who said this, was because something allowed all of the fire precautions to be unzipped simultaneously, which was of course the facade in Grenfell Tower. When you start to look at the human element, as you put it.
So this is the opposite view. So the likes of
Yes.
Elspeth Grant, quite outspoken on the subject.
It would be a great example of somebody who's advocating
and we might,
for that.
and we'd like to get her on here at some stage. I think
of
we're happy
course.
for her. We'd love her to come on and talk to us about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just give the opposite view.
So the opposing view to that, and it's one that as I've got older, Dave, and more mature, I've bought into more.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
And that is, what a fantastic idea. What if it goes horribly wrong? And actually, everybody should have the right to leave the building when they're ready to leave. That's the bit that my brain never really turned on to until recently. Actually, was where I said, you don't need to leave the building. You're safe to leave. And obviously, the arguing point, the human point of that is, yeah, but you're in a building that's on fire. If you become aware of it, you should be able to make your own mind up about leaving and be supported to leave.
Yeah, I mean, the human element is you've got a wife, 4 daughters, and you're at the top of an 18-storey building.
Yeah.
And there's a fire on the 16th floor. Are you going to stay in that building? Honestly, would you stay in that building?
No, not anymore.
You wouldn't. You'd leave, wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course. If I was aware of it, I'd leave.
And so anybody that lives in that sort of block feels the same. And it's the lack of confidence in the stay put strategy that's the problem.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that the principles of a solid building built out of concrete isn't still legitimate.
Yeah.
But confidence is important. There's many a football manager who's lost the confidence of his team and been sacked. He's not doing anything different, but the confidence in there, no good. Gone.
No, absolutely.
And that for me is a strong argument. And there is something about getting older and looking at it from that point of view. You start to think, well, a lot of the things we learn in life don't turn out to be as built on solid foundations as we think.
And I remember arguing around the advocating for stay put over evacuation 20 years ago, like very early into my career, where the argument always would be, well, the stay put strategy, let's say we go to an evacuation strategy in a 20-storey building, put a fire alarm in. That's the only way you're going to evacuate everyone. Day 1, you burn your toast. We all go and sit in the car park. Day 2, I burn my toast. 80% of us are stood in the car park. Day 3, our producer burns their toast, and 50% of us are sat in the car park. By the time the cameraman's burnt his toast on Thursday, none of us are getting out of the building anymore. So actually that argument was, there's no point, because from a management perspective, you'll never get everyone to evacuate on the day you need them to, because everyone will be ignoring the fire alarm. Now that worked 20 years ago, but technology isn't like that anymore. So actually you can be more sensible around what systems you use and what systems you apply and how the evacuation strategy is delivered. And actually you can start to make that work. So what I see is, and my concern would always be that if you abandon stay put, all of the passive fire protection measures that you put in a building that is set up for stay put from a fire engineering perspective, you could start to argue away because you're going to evacuate the building in 15 minutes. The reason buildings are built the way they are is they're 1 hour compartments and they are robust. You go to hotels, they're not 1 hour compartments, are they? They're not 30-minute fire doors.
And just to explain that point, and so you have a simultaneous evacuation.
So you have simultaneous evacuation approach. But the point is, a simultaneous evacuation approach in a hotel means that you don't need 60-minute fire compartments in the rooms.
But you also have a lot of staff on duty in a hotel, so you can manage the evacuation.
Absolutely. So you transfer that into a social housing block or a high-rise private residential tower. There is a legitimacy to reduce the fire precautions in the building because you are evacuating people, and that's the bit that I would worry about.
So I think on that basis, and I think we can both see the legitimacy of a recommendation that says at least a reconsideration of the appropriateness of stay put.
Yeah,
I think, and that is something that it should be reconsidered. That is without a doubt, and it needs an in-depth and informed conversation about it.
Yeah,
it's there's arguments for and against on both sides, but yeah.
I think the problem we've got as an industry, we go down this route of it being the way, therefore the way stays forever.
Yeah,
and I think stay put's a great example of that. And we can argue that the reason we've had a lower number of fatalities since the inception of the stay put strategy is because of the stay put strategy. But actually what we found is statistics have started to go back up again, even taking Grenfell Tower over, the statistics have started to see an increase in them. But the reason we've started to lose the fire brigade and started to get rid of them is because ministers have started to say, well, fire fatalities are decreasing, therefore we can get rid of the fire brigade. But actually, we don't really know why fatalities started to decrease. So I think with that, we just have to be, as an industry, more open, I think, to change and new ideas and technological advance and build that into the status quo of the way we design and manage buildings.
Sure. Fire safety strategies to be required in all high risk buildings.
Yes.
We happy with that?
Of course.
Seems like a logical
and it talks about registered fire engineers because obviously the inquiry is starting to consider fire engineer as a protected profession, much like the role of doctor or architect.
I don't think that's a good. It makes sense because, as you know, a lot of people call themselves fire engineers who aren't what we would call a fire engineer.
No,
I don't think they don't have a very legitimate or relevant or important role in fire safety.
No, absolutely.
But for example, a fire alarm engineer
or a fire extinguisher engineer
isn't the same as a fire engineer.
No,
to our terminology.
No, absolutely.
But to the public or to somebody employing someone or contracting someone, what's the difference? Same thing,
well, 100%. And I'll be honest, I don't think fire alarm engineers and fire extinguisher engineers are pretending that
not seeking to deceive.
They're not pretending they're fire engineers and going designing the next 45-storey residential tower in London,
sure.
Are they? You know, much like we bring out a washing machine engineer, a dishwasher engineer, they're there to do some sort of job which they consider to be technical, therefore they have the approach of engineer. The point is, a fire engineer doing the design of a building needs to be competent to do that. Mm-hmm. And if anyone can call themselves a fire engineer, and I don't even think it's the other professions that add the word engineer to the end, it's people saying they're fire engineers when they're not fire engineers. So I think it should be protected. If you are a fire engineer, which means you design buildings, that should be a protected profession like architect is.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yes, we agree
Fairly
with that
easy one to agree on, I think.
Yeah, good one, Martin.
And I'm not hearing too much people disagreeing with that generally anyway.
I don't think there's much disagreement with any of this stuff, is there?
No. Mandatory accreditation for fire risk assessors.
Yeah, all over that. That works for me.
I think most legitimate firms these days are accredited. They're on the IFSM, TFOIR register. Individuals are. Most legitimate companies are BAFE SB 205 accredited or equivalent. You know, these things are commonplace now.
Yes.
And if you're engaging with a company or an assessor who's not those sorts of things or equivalent, more for you by this time.
I agree. And I'm gonna go one step further, which will annoy a lot of people, and I don't say it to annoy them. The fire industry were warned a long time ago that if we don't sort our stuff out with fire risk assessment and competency and registration, that someone would do it for us.
The conversation was 10, 12 years ago.
Literally 10 or 12 years ago.
When me and you were both doing it as a 100%. Daily job.
We were warned, And I think there are so many ways of becoming a registered fire risk assessor. You know, there are tiered registers, which I think are fantastic. I think the IFSM have done an absolute blinding job with the tiering of risk assessors, and I take my hat off to the IFSM for that. And I think the same thing applies to the Institute of Fire Engineers, and then you've got SBAFE, SP205, and you've got FRAX, obviously, the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Scheme run by Warrington. All of those things are great, but there's still 4 of them. What are we like? Why is there not one? So let's have one register. Let's get all of those organisations to just agree to throw all those people into the middle. Let's have one scheme to rule them all, tiered scheme, because that works great. And I just hope they can put the fees that they will lose out of doing it to one side and agree for the sake of an industry.
That's where we start the open fire register. And
yes, absolutely. Well, yeah, but it'd be free to join, and we'd administer it with.
Wouldn't that make a change if people stop doing it to make money and just did it for the good of the industry?
Wouldn't that be great? How much is it to join? It's free if you're competent.
Well, it's almost like...
Done.
Yeah.
We'll even give you a free special badge.
Join us.
Join us. Absolutely.
The revolution. Okay, perhaps one slightly more controversial. A single regulator to oversee all the construction industry. So regulator will be unlikely to engage directly with social landlords, for example, but would oversee many bodies they deal with regularly, such as contractors, which carry out high-risk buildings, fire risk assessors, consultancies, oversight of product testing and certification, all of these areas that come together under one
regulator. Yeah,
so for a start, there's a lot of reversal of the deregulation that occurred, I think I'm right in saying 2010 with the Tory government.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to get rid of a piece of legislation to bring in a new piece of legislation.
And so now it's gone back round the other way, and they're introducing this body, corporate, to kind of oversee it all in one place.
Yeah.
Positive or huge bureaucratic mess akin to many other government?
I think, like with all things, it depends on how good they are, doesn't it? And how bureaucratic they become. But I'm all for less numbers of organisations being responsible for oversight of delivery, because the least number of people you have to comply with, the more likely you are to comply, right? If there are 50 bodies looking at a construction in terms of oversight, I might know about 48 of them, but I might fall foul of the last 2. If there is one, and I'm engaged with that one, then actually the chances of me delivering properly are relatively high, and actually being caught if I'm not doing it right are relatively high. But I think it's all about how that organisation is administered, and I think if we're honest and look at the building safety regulator, are we impressed with the way the BSR is currently delivering it? I reckon most people would probably say not particularly. You know, it feels a bit bureaucratic. The times are not particularly good. The level of red tape is relatively high.
Is that not partly because there's a lack of resource, there's a lack of skilled people in our industry?
It's everything.
There's a lack of money from
of
supporting
course.
It all. You know, it's.
But when you think about the number of people that need to be employed to run the building safety regulator, and then to run it at the speed at which construction needs to move, and I think if you reflect on a Gateway 2 application taking 8 weeks. Well, there's organisations ready to get work done now. So actually the regulator's preventing work from being done because they want you to stand by for 8 weeks to do remedial works. And I get it in new buildings because there isn't that rush in the same way. But in buildings that are existing that carry risk, why would there not be a workaround procedure or a different procedure that allows stuff to happen quicker? So I think that's an element of bureaucracy that I hope I wouldn't see in that.
An interesting one for your company, CLM Fireproofing, as a kind of a... Given that your investment into your test facility, there's a suggestion of or a recommendation for publicly available test reports.
Yeah.
Now, just to sort of open this up a little bit for those who aren't involved in that side of the industry, obviously, anything that's going to be accredited, like a good example would be fire doors.
Yeah.
Gets third-party tested. And generally, the results of that test report are kept highly secretive. People don't. The client will often ask to see that evidence, and it's usually done behind locked door, where the product manufacturer will bring it and show it to the client. But they're not allowed to photograph it, or
No.
because it's essentially their IP, their design and all that sort of thing. So I think my question to you, CLM, as a company that will be in that area and that would affect you. One, how would you feel about that? Would you be happy to share your test reports if everybody else was? And two, I don't know, how do you police that?
So I think the impact on CLM fire testing, CLM fire proofing as an organisation is broadly nothing, no impact at all, really. CLM fire testing will obviously be an organisation that may be commanded by law to release test reports on behalf of manufacturers, but this is fundamentally a manufacturer's problem, and in particular, I believe the specialist services world. So the duct manufacturers, the bus bar manufacturers, the fire door manufacturers, people who are delivering specialist services, those organisations that are highly secretive about their test data because they spend an incredibly large amount of money on tests, have historically been able to hide those tests from their customers and from the industry, and they get something accredited and they'd be able to go. But all of it would be under a veil of darkness, all of it. And what the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report says is, we don't trust you enough, industry, so we are not going to allow you to do that anymore. BBA certificates, which are obviously a big part of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry, BBA certificates, when they are issued by the regulator, will have all of the test data for that product available in that document. Now that impacts fire door manufacturers dramatically, and you and I have spent time auditing fire door people when we were looking at the Hyde framework 8 years ago, maybe, and obviously we know how secretive they are about them. What this Phase 2 report suggests is there is no more secrecy. That IP is going to be freely available. So in some respects, that's great news, because it allows you to not be, dishonest. Not that I think many door manufacturers are dishonest. I don't believe in that dishonesty, but you're not going to be able to do that anymore. So all of your test data is going to be out there. Now, that's good news, I think, for door manufacturers. It's good news for testing, because if they start to think about collaboration, then you're going to spend less money on your testing, which means you can spend more money collectively on testing on more things. So I think it's a positive thing, but that will have a massive impact on those organisations, a dramatic impact.
And I think with that, that's the last time we're going to get to squeezing any recommendations for today. I think
absolutely. It would be remiss of you to not talk about the Backdraft Appreciation Society.
Yes, Tom, have you joined the Backdraft Appreciation Society, available at backdraftmovie.com?
I have. What is it that you get if you join?
You will get to your inbox every month for free. This costs you nothing, Tom. Yeah. You'll get a photograph of Kurt Russell, no context given.
Whether you remember or not, or just only if you remember?
Whether I remember or not.
So,
no, just if I remember.
So I bought you a present.
Have you?
I've bought you a present.
You bought me a present?
I've bought you a present. And it's hidden under my... It's like, do you remember Grandma used to hide it under her chair?
Our Grandma.
Forgotten your birthday.
Did we share a Grandma?
We didn't share a Grandma. So, just make sure I do that.
What is it? Well,
do you know what it is?
No, I don't know what it is. You'll get me a present.
So this is real, right?
Okay.
And it's for you. It's not for the show. This is my little present to you.
My God.
I thought you'd like it.
So this is an original autographed, signed by William Baldwin. Oh my God.
There you go. So it's almost an early...
Which camera are we on?
It's an early wedding present now.
Ah, Tom, that is amazing.
It is, but it is real. I didn't sign it.
That is so cool.
Good. I'm glad you like it. I tried to get you a helmet, but they were £17,000.
Can we have this on the table?
I think if you're willing to bring it in and out of London...
I'm willing to bring it in.
Why not?
That is amazing, my friend.
Good. Well, I'm glad you liked it. And we should probably just remind everyone that we're completely independent. But we do work for gifts.
Well, yeah, you had some words earlier about how we're very much we're not representing our firms here necessarily. We're not speaking on behalf of them. They're very supportive of what we do, which is great.
Yes.
Frankham's and CLM, but we're very open to inviting anybody across the industry to come and join us, come and talk to us.
Absolutely.
To agree, disagree.
And I think what I would say is we've toyed, because we do get asked if people can sponsor us. People say, can I sponsor an episode? And in the early days, we let that happen. In the early series, we did, we worked with people and we had a series that was sponsored. Went through this whole rigmarole of the way that works and the commercial stuff around it. And I think we're both in a situation now where the organisations we work for are just happy to continue to pay for this. I knew you'd appreciate that.
I do appreciate it.
And I think the important bit is that organisations, if they're competitors to CLM fireproofing, competitors to CLM testing, competitors to Frankham Risk Management Services, your right to sit on this chair is just as much as ours.
Yeah,
right?
we're comfortable with
We
that.
will sit on the yellow chairs, though, and ask the questions, to be clear. But we want people to come and talk. This is an open debate.
We just want honest, frank conversation.
100%.
Don't come here to sell your wares necessarily. You'll get that chance. You get the exposure. But we just want to have an honest, frank conversation.
An honest and Frankham conversation.
And, yeah. Nicely done.
Well done. Anyway, we'll see you next week.
See you next week, Tom.
Cheers. Bye.